Hello and welcome. Today we're putting leadership theory on trial, you could say. We're going to take a really well-known model for what makes a great leader and see how it actually plays out in the real world through the lens of a real senior executive.
So let's just jump right in with the big question. What really separates a good leader from a truly great one? I mean, is it just about charisma? Is it hitting the numbers? Or is it something deeper, something more practical? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
All right, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll lay out the blueprint for what's considered exemplary leadership. Then, we'll introduce you to our case study. We're calling him Executive X. After that, we'll get into the fun stuff, analyzing where he nails it and, just as importantly, where he admits he struggles. And finally, we'll pull it all together for the ultimate lesson here. Okay, so before we can properly analyze a real leader, we need a benchmark, right? A gold standard to measure against. And believe me, we've got one of the best right here.
Now, this isn't just some theory someone cooked up in an afternoon. This is one of the most rigorously tested leadership models out there. It was developed by two researchers, Kouzes and Posner, and it's built on a mountain of data. And when I say mountain, I mean they analyzed over 5 million survey responses. They asked people a really simple but powerful question. What are you doing when you're at your absolute best as a leader?
And what they found was that the answers, again and again, fell into these 5 core behaviors. These are the pillars we're going to use for our analysis today. Model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart. All right, time to meet our case study. To keep things anonymous, we're just going to call him Executive X. He's a top exec who leads a global organization with around 300 franchise units. So you can imagine, his world is incredibly fast-paced. It's complex, and it's spread all over the globe. And what's so fascinating is his own definition of leadership. Right off the bat, he gives us this core philosophy. Be innovative, but also practice radical accountability. This single quote tells you so much about his fundamental values as a leader.
So let's start breaking this down. Using those 5 practices as our guide, let's first take a look at where Executive X's leadership style really, truly shines. The first practice is model the way. This is all about credibility, walking the talk. And wow, does this perfectly illustrate his strength here. I mean, his whole philosophy of taking the blame and giving the credit is the definition of setting an example. And on top of that, his rule that new execs have to follow the franchise model reinforces that everyone is held to the same clear standard.
Now let's talk about challenge the process. Great leaders don't just maintain the status quo. They're always looking for ways to improve, to shake things up. Executive X saw his company was falling behind on technology. So instead of just accepting it, he went out and pursued a strategic buyout that landed them a $2 million investment. That's not a small tweak. That is a total game changer.
And the third area where he really excels is encourage the heart. This is all about recognizing people's contributions and making them feel valued. His core belief about giving credit where credit is due, that is a textbook example of this practice in action. It's how you build morale, motivation, and ultimately a real sense of community. But of course, no leader is perfect. And what I think makes this case study so powerful is that Executive X is incredibly self-aware about his own challenges, which just so happen to align with the other practices in the model. Okay, so take inspire a shared vision. This is about painting that big, exciting picture of the future that gets everyone on board. But Executive X, he straight up admits, I don't do that very well. He knows he's an ideas person, always a few steps ahead, which makes it hard to communicate a steady vision for the day-to-day. But here's the key. He knows this about himself, so he hires great managers to fill that gap.
This next one is fascinating because it shows the tension of real-world leadership. Enable others to act is all about empowering your team. But here's the reality check. The sheer pressure of leading a global team, we're talking about 300 emails a day, forces him to be hyper-efficient. And he admits this can make him seem dismissive, which of course can make people feel unheard and works directly against that goal of empowerment.
So we've seen the model in action, the good and the challenging. But why does any of this actually matter? Let's get to the bottom line and look at the data, because the impact of this stuff is just staggering.
Just look at this. The researchers asked people what percentage of their talent and skills they felt were being used by their worst leaders versus their best leaders. The results are mind-blowing. Under the worst leaders, people said only about 31% of their talent was being put to use. But under the best leaders, that number jumps to 95%. Think about that. The best leaders get literally 3 times more talent and energy out of their people.
And it doesn't stop there. When leaders consistently use these 5 practices, their teams report employee engagement scores that are 25 to 50% higher. And that's not just a fuzzy metric. That translates directly into pride in your work, motivation, team loyalty, and yes, productivity. These are the real, tangible results of great leadership.
So what is the ultimate lesson from our case study? Well, I think this quote from the original analysis just nails it. The big takeaway here isn't that Executive X was a perfect leader. Not at all. The key was his self-awareness. He knew his weaknesses, and he built a strong team around him to make up for them.
Which brings it all back to you, right? This whole deep dive shows that leadership really isn't about being perfect across all 5 of these practices. It's about having the awareness to know your own strengths and your own struggles. So, the real question to leave you with is this: where do you excel, and what are you actively doing to manage the areas where you don't?